Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's videos are all about investigations. I get involved in some fire and flood investigations fairly regularly. I share examples of them on my social media, and today we're going to have a little look on YouTube. Now, a while ago I did share one around a garage fire, and we're going to start today's video looking again at a fire damaged property that was started in the electrical system. We'll speak about the ins and outs of it during the voiceover and subsequent conclusions. I've had to voice it over because there was very noisy extractors and other bits and pieces going on site, so we couldn't record any audio while we were there. But I wanted to show you, guys and girls, what goes on with that and some of my opinions around, containing the spread of fire within a domestic home, and how I think there are still some changes we could make. We've seen a lot recently around AFDDs and also the fire supports on your cabling systems, but I think there's other things we could do, and we're maybe overlooking some of that at present, but we'll speak about that a little bit later on. We're also going to look at a flood damaged property, and again this is to help the insurers determine exactly what's happened and the resulting damage from that event, and it's not always as it seems, and we'll get to that as well later on. Now, before we go and look at the fire damage property, if you haven't already, it would make a huge difference to the channel if you could subscribe and click the bell. So if you've not done that already, please consider it, and I would be really grateful. Let's jump out to the first site and see exactly what's happened. So you can see on this one, I've got Matthew with me. He's inspecting the consumer units to see exactly what we've got going on, and you'll note there's some solar PV there. This side of the property was relatively undamaged, thankfully, so the kitchen and consumer units have survived themselves. But if you look over towards the bathrooms, we have got the evidence of the fan burning out here, all on the toilet seat, and then the fire that's obviously impacted that plasterboard ceiling, but it has largely remained intact. Now, if we go and look in the hall, you'll see as we step outside here that the loft hatch is open, and we'll have a little peek up into there properly in just a minute, but that's where the bulk of damage has occurred, up in the loft. This bathroom, the extractors shared the same ducting, and you can see that it's melted through and spread into this room as well, and there is all of the smoke damage within that bedroom. Now, up in this loft, this side is just storage, but there is another element up there that is converted living space. Now, the fire service have said that's unsafe to access at present, so I can't show you that. But we can have a little look up through this hatch, seeing as it's open, and you can see the damage to the timbers and all of the roofing felt that's melted away through the course of the fire. So obviously it was quite intense up there. Luckily, the fire brigade were on site within 3 minutes, and they managed to stop it totally taking the roof structure out, but obviously this is now all going to need to be replaced, and there's an extensive period of repair work now needed, and the occupants of this property are in their 90s, and they're obviously going to have to be out of there now for several months. So this is the solar PV setup, where we've got our isolator and a separate consumer unit, and the rest of the install is hanging on this old 3036 board, which had push-in MCBs as the solar setup down there as well. So there's no RCD protection on any of this, and the SY cabling has got in via a very interesting route and obviously isn't landed correctly either, so that's a separate issue altogether. But yeah, no RCD protection. None of the circuit protected devices operated. You can see the meters off there, so the service fuse has gone pop, and that's ultimately what's taken out the supply. You see there's a few gremlins there leading up on that head, so the DNO have been informed, and they're coming out to look at this once we've finished our investigation and set up some temporary power. You can see there's evidence of all the water damage to the ceilings, even at this end of the property, where the fire brigade have obviously had to spray a considerable amount of water to put out the system. This again, a look back into the bathroom to see the melted fan on the toilet seat, and we'll have a little look at a picture of the temporary board that we put in place so the drying out and extractor crews can get on with things once the DNO are finished. Okay, so as you will have seen there has been quite an extensive spread of fire around the property, and that spread occurred through the ducting system between extractor fans. So we had a couple of bathrooms with using the same extract system. It was in PVC solid ducting, and that kind of acts as a wick to the fire spread, and it just moves between the different rooms within the building, essentially bypassing any fire protecting properties you might have of a plasterboard ceiling. And I know there's the argument of one compartmentation for a domestic dwelling, and that's never set right with me in general anyway, but certainly not in semi-detached and terrace properties. I think we need to get a little bit better at the way we approach that. Now, if you think about other penetrations in a ceiling, we would typically now install fire-rated downlights, even if that wasn't necessarily the case. John Ward's done a great video talking about that in the past. And I'm thinking now about other ceiling penetrations, such as speakers that are going in. As we had here with the extractor fans, you also got things like your positive input ventilation systems and mechanical ventilation systems that are in there. There are various reasons that ceilings get penetrated, and they're not all to do with electrical equipment. So I'm wondering, especially based on the number of extractors that do burn out, we go and find a lot of these, and usually the results aren't as catastrophic as they were in this case. If we should be looking at using metallic ducting and some of the collars that we would typically see fitted to try and stop the spread of fire, at least through the ducting system itself, and try and maintain the integrity of that plasterboard ceiling at the very least, as we would in a commercial setting. You know, there's different requirements in those locations. I think that's something that we need to think about. Or if that's something that's not cost effective or too complicated, perhaps looking at service voids for all of our cables, pipework, ducts, as you find in American construction, where we're maybe making a fireproof service route within the building itself. It also makes pulling in new cables, pipes and ducts easier in the future, so there's double benefits there. So I think that's something we really need to look at to perhaps give people a better chance of not having fires totally gut an entire place from something as simple as an extractor fan motor catching light. You know, we do that with our consumer units now. We've got the AFDDs and things. You know, there's the argument, if there was an AFDD in this install, would it have operated and stopped that motor from running and burning out? Who knows? So there's various ways we can look at this to improve safety. And I think when cost is obviously a factor, it's a factor for everybody. But we're kind of at that place now where the cost and safety equation and that place we sit on the risk line graph that Neil has explained in the past on the podcast. For those of you who haven't listened, go and check out the Electrician's Show. But there's that scale there where you sit in terms of risk based on what you're prepared to do as a contractor and what the client's prepared to accept. And I think there's some adjustment needed in that, in the way we approach fire safety within domestic property still. Just a personal opinion on that one. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm interested in your views and opinions, which is why I'm sharing this video. You know, speaking about these things might lead to some consensus of opinion that might help industry. Who knows? Otherwise, we've all just had a good natter, and there's nothing not to like about that. Without further ado, let's go and have a look at the flood damage property. Now, just to set this one out, we've been called in by the insurer a few days after the leak's taken place. They want to know how extensive the damage is to the electrical system and if there are any other factors at play that they need to be aware of within it. Not to the point that they're trying to get out of paying out. I do a lot of these and that's never the case. They often get a bad rep along those lines. They just want to ascertain the safety for people coming to work on the building during the repair work and plugging in things like their extractors and dehumidifiers and other bits and pieces along those lines, and to make sure that the remedial work that's going to take place afterwards isn't still going to be at risk of future damage because of something else that's going on in the electrical system. But let's go and take a look. I've got Nathan with me on this one. He's got the pleasure of joining me for the day because his mentor Matthew is otherwise unavailable. Nathan's now in his second year. He's doing an absolutely cracking job as training to be an electrician. It was great to spend a bit of time with him on site, and he was like a rat up a drain pipe hunting down this fault. And once you've watched this, that statement might make a bit more sense than it sounds right now. Let's get to it. So this is how we found things out on site, minus the lid being off that junction box. I'd opened that up because my first view was that was just going to be full of water, and that was what was causing our problem. But upon digging around and having a little feel down the back of this waste pipe leading off into the plastic trunking somebody's installed to hide the kitchen cabling away, we realised there'd been some damage to one of the ring final circuit legs, where a rodent had been eating away at the outer and inner insulation. And obviously when the dishwasher started to leak, it's found its way into that and upset the RCD. You can see that section of cable there, so they've had a proper good nibble. And you can even see where that current's jumped across between the CPC and the line within that cable right there. Now, this is also still presenting as a problem because we believed that in changing that little bit of cable that we'd found damaged, we would clear the fault. It wasn't the case. There were some other issues further around that circuit, and as we pulled more and more of the kitchen to pieces, we realised where that was. Now you can see there are also some issues here at the main intake. Eddy currents on a single phase system are not that much of a drama, to be honest with you. The heating effect is minimal. John Ward's done a cracking video on that in the past. You can see somebody's had these heads open at some stage. There's no seals on them. The earthing is of particular interest. That clamp, I'm not going to fiddle around with it, but it was actually loose on the head itself, so we've reported that one into the DNO for them to come and take a look. And you'll see we've got an old Wilex board, but somebody at some stage, I suspect when that kitchen was fitted, have altered the layout. So they've replaced one of the RCDs from the split load system and put a main switch in, and then fitted some RCBOs of a different brand into the board. So we set to doing a few tests, obviously trying to hunt down this fault. Typically insulation resistance tests are your best friend on this one, to try and find where we are having an issue. But there are some wider gremlins in this system. You can see we've got the type AC RCD, and there's still a few circuits hanging off that, and it's a bit of a mess. There's been some adjustments made to the cabling within the consumer unit itself, and it doesn't look to have been the most high quality workmanship, shall we say. And we've recommended to the customer that they have a fully ICR of the property outside of any investigation around the leak itself, and we're going to be back to do that at a later stage. And yeah, that's kind of the condition we had on the consumer unit. The RCBO was obviously operating for the socket circuit in the kitchen due to the rodent damage, and we'll have a little look at some more of that. So you can see Nathan's under there just swapping out the damaged section that we had located, so we can do some further testing around that circuit and see if we can find where any other issues might be, and if it's worth trying to replace them or just writing this one off as a rewire. Because as I'll explain later on, getting to some of these things when it's been set up in this way is not always straightforward. And you can see there we've got Mr. or Mrs. Mouse or Rat having a good nibble there. They also had a nibble on these cables. It's not readily viewable on the picture, but they have done where they pop up out of the trunking. You can see the trunking's not even been installed that well, and the rodents have been inside that too. Okay, so you'll see what we were faced with there. It was a dishwasher leak that had spread all across underneath the kitchen cabinets. It had got under the wood engineered floor and was soaking in all over the place. There was extensive evidence of rodents running around under all of those kitchen cabinets, and as you will have seen, some nibbling on the cables. Now that's occurred prior to any of this flooding, and the moisture, as it always does, finds its way into the electrical system. It's found those breaks in insulation and worked its way down the cabling, and our IR values were effectively 0. Nathan was like a rat up a drain pipe hunting that rodent damage. It's probably not a funny joke, but it's making me laugh. And he located that very, very quickly, and we were able to take out the damaged section of cabling. Now unfortunately there were other damaged sections that we couldn't access. So this is one of the reasons, I said this a few times, when, with the best intentions, people come forward and say you can put cabling behind the cabinets. Why chase it in the wall? Make it easier for the next person coming along to do work in the kitchen. If ever it's taken out and replaced again, it's really easy to adjust the wiring. And that is true, but you are also inviting a problem that you really don't want. Kitchens are the one place where you will most likely find rodents wanting to make a home, and once the supply of crumbs and food runs out, they go to the next available thing they want to eat, and that is usually anything plastic. So if you've got your cables clipped direct onto a wall, or even worse, laid on the floor under the cabinets, even in plastic containment, they will eat it. I've seen it. We've been to loads of call-outs like this. There was evidence of that all behind these cabinets. They'd chewed the trunking, they'd chewed the outer insulation and inner insulation of the cabling, and they were quite happy doing that, to the point that the electrics trip. They don't care, they just keep eating it. And yeah, it's one of those. If you are putting wiring systems in behind kitchen cabinets, my recommendation is you use a appropriate form of containment, be it steel, or you chase it into the fabric of the building. If somebody is to hit that with a screw or a nail or whatever else, then that's hard luck, but you've given it the best chance possible of, being protected from something as silly as a mouse chewing a cable. Because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to get behind a 50 grand kitchen in some cases, maybe even more, to replace a section of damaged cable you can no longer get to. It's a pain in the ass that you don't want to be stood there trying to discuss with a client, how are you going to do it, and it's easily avoided. And in this case, with this kitchen, I could fully understand why they'd gone the way they had. They were solid concrete floors, it was a flat ceiling above, there's the issue of getting your drops in and out for accessories, and it was so easy to just pop a bit of trunking up, and they'd done a neat job of it, run the cable around and then up to all of those sockets and switches. Yeah, it made for an easy job for them, and I'm sure it was done with the best of intentions, but it's not the way I would approach it in the future. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using horizontal chases in these circumstances. I showed it a few videos ago where we had a kitchen rewire we were doing, again with a concrete floor and a flat ceiling that had just been plastered, and we used horizontal routes between a couple of socket outlets. There is absolutely no reason why you can't. It's a myth. Sometimes it's the safest and best thing that you can do. You're keeping your circuit length as short as possible, you're staying within zones, they're there for that reason, and going up and down, increasing your circuit length, and certainly if you're just going to clip it direct behind a cabinet, is something I would avoid if I was you. Speaking more about the flood now, it was a dishwasher leak that had spread out behind those units, so it was an appliance fault, the hose had split, again, really common. It caused extensive damage to the kitchen cabinets and flooring, so that's all coming out anyway, and we've advised a full rewire on those kitchen circuits because of the damage by the rodents and the ingress of moisture to the cabling system as a result. Now, the insurers will obviously be aware that the rodent damage isn't necessarily something that's taken place at the time of the dishwasher leak, but because of the moisture ingress to some junction boxes in the local area as well, they'll just approve that for rectification, and hopefully we'll be the contractor sent back to do it. It's usually the case, and we can show on the channel how we will go about putting that back in the way I think it should have been done in the first place. And that's one of the things that's brilliant about an apprenticeship, just to speak about Nathan again. You know, I've said to him lots of times the theory aspect of this when we've been doing kitchen jobs. This is why we do it. This is why we're putting cables in the wall, why you've got to get the chaser out and then patch up and all of the mess and dust around all of that, because we are trying to ensure the longevity of the wiring system, selection and erection. And him to see that close up, to see actually this is why we do it, because otherwise you're going to be stood in this situation and it's avoidable, and that penny drops for them and they get that experience to carry forward in their future careers. I think that's fantastic, and Nathan's doing so well. He's on top of all of his work at college, he's an important member of our team now, he's productive and helping us generate revenue, and he's certainly doing more than covering his own salary in the work he outputs. And that's one of the huge plus points of the apprenticeship system. So if you don't currently have an apprentice in your team, I would recommend you consider it. And again, speaking about the donations we've had coming in, you've heard me mention this on social media and on the prior YouTube videos. We've now got the support of TIS, Nipex, Proteus, Martindale and Voltimum, and there are goodies been sent in and some funds provided to help us kit out some apprentices. I'm actually speaking with a couple of the influential plumbers out there as well, for them coming forward with some bits and pieces where we can maybe do the same. There's some plumbing apprentices too, and there's some wider discussions in and around apprentice one-to-one and all of that across trades at the moment. We'll see how that develops, but just to briefly mention that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions about either of the properties, please drop them in below. I love the engagement that happens in the comments on my videos. It's one of my favourite things about doing these. If you haven't already, thumbs up, thumbs down. Please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next one very soon. Thank you for watching.